My wife once told me she'd never miss a single one of her sister's milestones, not birthdays, graduations, nothing. So imagine my confusion when I found a used makeup wipe in our bathroom trash with a lipstick color too bold for Sarah, a shade I'd only ever seen on her sister, Claire. I knew it wasn't Sarah's because she'd stopped wearing makeup altogether after turning natural beauty into her new personality. But there it was, like a bright red confession buried under tissues and floss picks, left behind by a ghost that shouldn't have been there. And then came the moment that broke the rhythm of my ordinary life in two. I found a short, white veil tucked between our bed's headboard and mattress, crumpled like it had been shoved away in a hurry, delicate, silky, and undeniably bridal. Sarah wasn't the bride. Claire was. That veil was part of her rehearsal outfit, a cheap Amazon accessory she was excited about, one she'd gushed over at dinner a week prior while Sarah scrolled absently on her phone, pretending to listen. So either Sarah had developed a secret obsession with wedding-themed cosplay, or her sister had been playing bride in our bedroom. I didn't panic. I didn't confront. I just started watching. The next morning, I kissed my wife on the forehead and told her she looked tired. She blinked twice too fast, like a poker player flinching. Claire's wedding was a month away, and I'd been roped into it as a groomsman, expected to smile and deliver heartfelt speeches. That's when the clock started ticking. I didn't rage. I didn't sob. Instead, I got organized. I cleaned out my phone and created a locked folder. I bought a pocket recorder and hid it in the guest bathroom. I changed my Apple ID password and started checking device locations obsessively. Every time Claire came over for wedding planning, she brought red wine. Sarah hated red wine. Claire always wore flats because she was clumsy, but now I started noticing high heels scuffing our hallway. Once, I found one of Claire's earrings under the couch, not a hoop or a stud, but one of those dramatic single-drop earrings she only wore when she wanted to be noticed. Sarah insisted Claire had probably lost it during one of their bachelorette planning sessions, but there was no bachelorette party scheduled until next month. I watched them closely that night. Claire couldn't make eye contact with me. Sarah overcompensated, laughed too loud, poured me scotch she normally said was too expensive to waste. Something was rotting behind those polite smiles. But I wasn't going to accuse them. I was going to dismantle them. I started texting Claire occasionally, innocently enough, asking about Sarah's favorite wedding memories to help plan a surprise speech. She took the bait, said she was flattered I cared so much. The tone of her messages softened, and by the third week, she started venting about her fiancé, Jason, how he was nice but safe, how he didn't make her feel alive. She didn't know I was baiting her, mirroring her doubts, validating her chaos. Sarah had told me once that Claire always fell for men who acted like they could save her from herself. I played the part perfectly. Calm, gentle, loyal. I showed up to family dinners and offered to help with Claire's wedding planning, slowly becoming the man Claire thought her sister had married. I kept everything logged, screenshots, photos, receipts. I even recorded a late-night phone call where Claire drunkenly told me she dreamed about me instead of Jason and that she wondered, what if? The moment she said that, I knew I had her. The trap was set. All I needed was the right setting for the grand finale, and fate handed it to me wrapped in white silk and seasonal flowers. Claire's wedding day. A union built on illusion, about to be shattered by truth. There was a time when Sarah used to tell me everything, from the minor office gossip to the way she liked her coffee brewed differently depending on the season, like a barista with mood swings. Our life wasn't exciting by any Instagram standards, but it was ours, predictable, safe, maybe even a little boring, and we loved it that way. Or so I thought. It started slowly, like a hairline crack in a windshield you don't notice until it snakes across the whole glass. Sarah became busy in a way that didn't match the rhythms I knew so well. She took up new hobbies out of nowhere, pottery classes, early morning yoga, book clubs she never used to care about. She started locking her phone with a Face ID, joking that she was protecting our wedding plans and hiding surprises, but the jokes felt a little too rehearsed, her laugh a little too sharp. She started speaking in phrases that didn't belong to her, like, I need more personal space to grow, or, I'm redefining my emotional boundaries. Words that sounded like they were pulled from a therapy podcast she'd once mocked. She said she wanted to reconnect with herself, to find the woman she was before us. At first, I admired her self-improvement kick, helped her shop for art supplies, encouraged her to meet up with friends, thinking maybe I'd get to fall in love with her all over again. But the more she grew, the smaller I seemed to become in her eyes. I'd come home and find her laughing at something on her phone, and when I asked what was so funny, she'd hide the screen and say, "Just girl stuff." Once, I found a new set of lingerie receipts tucked under the front seat of her car, tags from a store I'd never seen her shop at before. When I asked if they were for the honeymoon she was planning for Claire, she nodded too quickly, cheeks a little too red, and changed the subject so fast my head spun. Her social media, once filled with pictures of us hiking, hosting dinners, being boring and happy, suddenly became a private account I wasn't even following anymore. When I asked, she brushed it off with a joke about wanting a safe space away from family drama before kissing me on the cheek and disappearing for the night to study wedding color palettes with Claire. I told myself it was normal. Weddings are stressful. Sisters are stressful. Growth is messy. But at night, lying in our bed, I'd feel the cold emptiness of her body turn just slightly away from mine, pretending to be asleep even though I could see the faint glow of her phone lighting up her face. She started making plans that didn't involve me: brunches, trips to the farmer's market, late-night planning sessions, and the funny thing was, every time she said she was with Claire, she'd act guilty, like she was confessing something awful when all she was doing was helping with wedding favors. One evening, she came home late, her hair slightly disheveled, smelling of expensive perfume she never wore for me. She mumbled something about losing track of time, how Claire needed her, how Jason had been distant, and she was just being a good sister. Her stories didn't add up, but they were close enough that if you didn't look too hard, you could believe them. I chose not to look too hard. I told myself that trust was the foundation of marriage, even if that foundation was starting to feel more like cracked concrete under my feet. I clung to what we used to have, even as it slipped between my fingers like sand, even as her smiles grew colder, her laughter more strained, even as I caught her humming a song one night in the kitchen, the same song Claire said she played in the car after their special late-night talks. She wasn't unhappy, at least not visibly, but her happiness had outgrown me, spilled into spaces I wasn't allowed to touch anymore. I became a background actor in her new, private life, the one she curated carefully, selectively, hiding it behind locked phones, closed doors, and vague assurances that everything was fine. And maybe if I had loved her less, I would have confronted her then. Maybe if I had been less patient, less hopeful, less proud, I would have demanded the truth while there was still time to salvage something. But I was still the man who believed in her, in us, in the fairy tale we had built together. I was still the idiot who thought that a small crack didn't mean the whole house was about to come crashing down. I stayed quiet. I stayed supportive. And while I watched her slip further and further away, a seed of cold, calculated rage began to take root deep inside me, silent but steady, biding its time for the perfect moment to bloom. The moment it all broke wasn't dramatic, not the way I used to imagine betrayal would look. No lipstick-stained collar, no drunken confession, no shadowy figures slipping out of the back door. No, it was far worse. It was silent, clinical. I was cleaning up the kitchen on a lazy Saturday morning when her phone lit up on the counter next to me, buzzing with a message from a contact saved under Claire's wedding planner, a name so boring, so ordinary, I almost didn't look twice. But something about the timing, how she just left the room humming to herself, how her face had stiffened when I reached for the phone to hand it to her, made me hesitate. I wasn't a jealous man. I didn't snoop. Trust had been my religion. But when I glanced down at the screen, the words hit like a sniper's bullet. Still can't stop thinking about last night. Wish you were waking up in my bed instead of his. Red heart. I didn't react. Not outwardly. Inside, though, it was like a lever had been pulled, draining the last remnants of warmth from my veins, replacing it with something cold and mechanical. I locked my jaw, wiped my hands dry on a kitchen towel, and slid her phone back into its place like nothing had happened. She walked back in a minute later, flashing that hollow smile she reserved for me now, kissed me absently on the cheek, and muttered something about needing to run out to pick up place cards for the wedding. I nodded, murmured something noncommittal, and watched her leave, the door clicking shut with a finality that told me she was never really planning on coming back, at least not to me. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, feeling the weight of 10 years of loyalty, trust, love collapse into dust at my feet. It wasn't just an affair. It was a carefully constructed double life, one I had been financing, supporting, loving from the outside while they tore me apart behind locked phones and whispered texts. The rage didn't come. The heartbreak didn't come. Only a terrible, freezing clarity. I knew now. I knew everything I needed to know. And I understood that confronting her would be useless, messy, emotional. The kind of reaction she could twist into some pitiful story about how we both made mistakes, or how complicated love can be. No, if she wanted chaos, I would give her silence. If she wanted confusion, I would give her certainty. I walked upstairs, each step measured and slow, as if moving too quickly might shatter the fragile shell of who I had been before this morning. In our bedroom, I found the little wedding album we had started curating for Claire, full of sample decor ideas, honeymoon brochures, handwritten notes about guest lists. I stared at it for a moment, then smiled, a tight, humorless thing that felt foreign on my face. They thought they were clever. They thought they had woven their little world so tightly I could never find the seams. But seams always show if you know where to look. And now, I would look at everything. I would listen to every lie, smile through every fake apology, play the devoted husband just long enough to deliver a blow so calculated, so devastating, that not even the ruins of our life together could be pieced back together. No warning, no bargaining, just the cold, methodical finality of a man who had nothing left to lose, and therefore, nothing left to fear. She wanted freedom. I would give it to her, wrapped in humiliation, tied with the ribbons of every secret she thought she had hidden away. She had made a fatal mistake, you see. She had taught me how to love her without conditions, without walls. She had just forgotten that love, once betrayed, doesn't simply die. It transforms. It hardens. It sharpens. And now, it was a weapon pointed straight at her heart. I moved carefully, like a man walking through a field of hidden mines, every step deliberate, every breath measured. The first thing I did was plant a seed, casually mentioning that I had a big project coming up at work, something that would demand long hours and late nights, something that would explain why I would no longer be around as much. Her eyes lit up with a flicker of excitement she couldn't quite hide before she buried it under a poorly feigned pout and murmured something supportive about chasing dreams. I smiled back, a hollow, polished grin, already knowing what would happen next. She started going out more, wedding errands, she called them, and I encouraged it, waving her out the door, hiding my disgust behind practiced affection. I set up a second, hidden phone line in my name, using it only to create a dummy Instagram account. Through it, I sent Claire a polite but flirtatious message under the guise of a stranger who had seen her at a coffee shop and was taken by her energy. Within hours, she replied, flattered, curious, too reckless for someone supposedly on the verge of marriage. Over the next few days, I watched as Claire's responses grew warmer, bolder, until she finally slipped, a screenshot she sent to my wife, laughing about her secret admirer. I saw the screenshot on Sarah's phone one evening when she left it unlocked in her rush to answer a call in the other room. They were laughing at the fake man I'd created. I smiled to myself. They were laughing at the wrong man. Step 2 was following the money. Sarah had always been loose with her spending, but now I began to comb through every joint account we shared, every statement, every transaction she thought would go unnoticed. It didn't take long to find the pattern. Frequent charges from a boutique hotel about 30 minutes from our house, a place that specialized in romantic escapes and marketed heavily to couples looking to reignite the passion. Each charge was carefully disguised: room service, spa treatments, late checkouts, but the timing matched too perfectly with her late-night, wedding brainstorming sessions with Claire. Step 3 was observation. I started keeping a detailed log, not on paper, but mentally, committing every word she said to memory, replaying her excuses against the hard evidence I gathered. When she said she was meeting Claire for lunch at a new vegan cafe downtown, I scheduled a flower delivery to Claire's work address, set for right after lunch. Claire signed for it personally, photo confirmation included. She hadn't left her office all day. Another lie. Another brick removed from the crumbling tower of their story. Step 4 was the trap. One Saturday, I suggested we throw a small pre-wedding gathering at our house for Claire and a few close friends, something intimate, a final celebration before her big day. Sarah hesitated, her fingers twitching around her coffee mug, before forcing a smile and agreeing. She didn't realize I had already slipped a voice-activated recorder under the couch in the living room and set up remote access to our home's security cameras from my laptop. I watched and listened from the neighbor's empty rental property next door, as Sarah and Claire arrived early under the excuse of setting up decorations, giggling like guilty schoolgirls. I listened as Claire whispered about how hard it was to keep it a secret, how she couldn't wait until everything changed, how she sometimes imagined just running away with me instead of going through with the wedding. My wife didn't even scold her. She laughed. She laughed and said, "Let's just survive the wedding first. Then we'll figure it out." Their betrayal wasn't a drunken mistake or a lapse of judgment. It was planned. It was deliberate. I sat in the dark, listening to their laughter float through the walls, feeling nothing. Not sadness, not anger, not fear. Only a growing, glacial stillness inside me. They thought they were invincible, hidden behind their web of lies and half-truths. But I had seen every thread, mapped every anchor point, followed every whisper through the cracks they didn't even realize they were leaving behind. They had built a stage for their performance, and now I would simply wait until the curtain rose to reveal the final act. I kept my face blank, my voice warm, my hands steady. I was still the loving husband. I was still the supportive brother-in-law to be. But in my mind, I was already gone, already standing on the other side of the fire I was about to set, watching the whole rotten facade collapse into ash. All I needed now was one perfect moment to strike, and they were already giving it to me, wrapped in white silk and vows they never intended to keep. I chose the wedding rehearsal dinner for the revelation, not because I wanted to be theatrical, but because I knew it was the one night Sarah would be forced to wear the perfect mask, surrounded by friends, family, Claire's fiancé Jason, all the people she still needed to fool for a little longer. The venue was beautiful, an upscale vineyard estate with long wooden tables, fairy lights strung overhead, everything glowing gold and soft, just like she always dreamed. I arrived early, carrying a simple black folder tucked under my arm like any man might carry a speech or itinerary, and I greeted everyone with warmth so convincing even I almost believed it. Sarah flitted about the room, laughing too loudly, her hand lingering just a second too long on Claire's arm every time she passed, as if tethering herself to the only person who truly knew how deep her deception ran. I waited until after the main course, after the toasts, after the waiters brought out the petit fours and champagne for the final round of speeches. I rose slowly, tapped my glass, and watched the room fall into an expectant hush, their faces glowing with anticipation under the soft lights. Sarah smiled at me then, wide and brittle, the way a rabbit smiles when it senses the wolf but doesn't yet see its teeth. I wanted to say a few words. I began, voice calm, steady, the warmth of a man deeply, deeply in love, or so they thought. I spoke of family, of loyalty, of promises made and kept. I spoke of how proud I was to be part of this new beginning. Then, casually, as if it were an afterthought, I opened the black folder and pulled out a handful of photographs. Crisp, high-quality images of Sarah and Claire, tangled together in a lover's embrace, time-stamped from nights they had sworn they were working on centerpieces or helping Claire de-stress. I held up the first photo and turned it slowly so everyone could see. The room froze. Forks clinked against plates. Someone gasped. Claire's mother dropped her champagne flute, the glass shattering across the floor like a gunshot. Sarah's face drained of color so fast I thought she might faint, but she didn't. She was too proud for that. She stood up, knocking her chair backward, eyes wide, trembling. "It's not what you think," she croaked, voice breaking at the edges. I tilted my head slightly, like a man studying a specimen under glass. "Oh," I said, my tone as mild and curious as if she'd just spilled coffee on a carpet. She stumbled forward, trying to snatch the photos from my hand, but I stepped back casually, letting the images flutter to the floor like broken promises. Claire was frozen too, her mouth working silently, her fiancé Jason staring at her like he didn't recognize the woman beside him. "We were just talking," Sarah said next, voice rising, desperation creeping in. "It's not like that. We were drunk. It was stupid. It didn't mean anything." I said nothing, just watched her quietly, letting the silence stretch so long and thin it felt like the room itself might tear apart. Her face twisted in panic, and then came the next phase, blame. "You pushed me away," she snapped, voice shaking. You were always so perfect, so predictable, like I wasn't even alive anymore. You made me feel invisible." I smiled thinly, not cruelly, but the kind of smile that says, "I have already measured you, weighed you, and found you desperately wanting. You found your visibility between the sheets of your sister," I said, soft enough that everyone had to lean in to hear it. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, like a fish gasping for air. She realized then there was no winning this battle, no spinning the story, and so she tried to reclaim some shred of pride, tilting her chin up and sneering, "You're just bitter because you could never excite me the way she does." A few people gasped, but I merely nodded slightly, as if she had confirmed a private theory of mine. "That's good," I murmured, my voice as gentle as a confession. "Hold on to that thought. You'll need it when you're alone." The mockery drained from her face like water from a sinking ship. She realized she had overplayed her hand. Fear flickered across her features, real, tangible, paralyzing, the fear of a woman who had finally grasped that she was not dealing with the man she had betrayed, but with something colder, sharper, more deliberate. Around us, no one spoke. No one moved. Even the waitstaff hovered at the edges of the room, unsure whether to step in or run. Claire was sobbing quietly now, Jason staring at her with an expression of utter revulsion, and yet it was Sarah who held my gaze, waiting, hoping for mercy that would never come. I stood there, silent, composed, watching her crumble under the weight of her own choices, and for the first time in months, I felt truly, perfectly still. I didn't leave. Not yet. I wanted her to sit in it. The shame, the confusion, the realization that the man she thought would fall apart had instead become her reckoning. The moment the last photo hit the ground, Sarah's mask cracked wide open, and the real her, the frantic, desperate version she always kept hidden under polished smiles and curated vulnerability, came clawing to the surface like something diseased. She started with pity first, hands clasped in front of her, voice trembling just enough to mimic sincerity. "Please, we can fix this. It was a mistake. I love you. I swear, you're my home." But I only stared at her, my expression as unmoved as stone, and the words dried up on her tongue like rain hitting sand. She switched gears almost immediately, the way cornered animals do, lashing out now, her voice sharpening into something ugly, something that turned heads and made the guests at the rehearsal dinner pretend to be suddenly fascinated by their plates. "You smothered me," she hissed, stepping closer, so close I could see the fine cracks forming around her carefully done-up eyes. "You were always there, always watching, breathing down my neck. How was I supposed to live like that?" I tilted my head slightly, studying her like she was an insect under glass, and said softly, "You called it loyalty when it suited you." The blow landed. She flinched like I had struck her. She tried to recover, her face twisting into a cruel sneer, voice rising loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "You were boring, you know that? Safe. Predictable. I needed more. I needed someone who could actually make me feel alive." I allowed the silence to stretch just a second too long before answering, voice low enough that she had to lean in to catch every word. "You mistook stability for weakness. That's why you'll lose everything." Her hands curled into fists at her sides, her breathing growing rapid and shallow, the way it does when a person realizes they're bleeding out but can't find where they've been cut. "This wouldn't have happened if you were a real man." She spat, her face blotchy with rage, her voice cracking under the pressure. Around us, conversations had died into a low, awkward murmur, eyes flickering toward us and away again, but I didn't even glance at them. I kept my focus locked on Sarah, the way a surgeon watches a tumor before cutting it out. "No," I said, voice like ice slicing through steel, "this happened because you're a coward." That word, coward, landed harder than any accusation could have. Her mouth opened and closed again, her whole body quivering with the need to hit back, to wound me somehow, but she couldn't find an angle anymore. I had stripped them all away. Every manipulation, every guilt trip, every sad little story she used to wrap herself in like armor was now lying in tatters at her feet. She looked small suddenly, almost childlike, overwhelmed and furious and terrified all at once, but I felt nothing. Not pity, not regret, not even anger. Just a cold, relentless certainty that this woman, the woman I had once planned my life around, was now nothing more than a chapter one was erasing line by line. She started sobbing then, ugly gasping sounds, mascara bleeding down her cheeks as she dropped onto a nearby chair and covered her face like that would somehow undo what had been laid bare. She shook her head violently, muttering into her palms, "You ruined everything. You didn't have to do this. You didn't have to embarrass me like this." And that was the final, bitter irony. She still thought this was about embarrassment, about wounded pride, about revenge. She couldn't even comprehend that what truly devastated her wasn't public shame or lost status. It was the realization that I was no longer reachable, no longer willing to dance to her frantic, desperate tune. I had become the mirror she couldn't stand to look into, the one that reflected all her ugliness without flinching, without softening the edges. I stepped back, slowly, My hands relaxed at my sides, watching her crumble into herself, her sobs echoing through the stunned, silent room. Claire sat frozen at her table, Jason staring at her like he was seeing a stranger, and in that moment, I realized Sarah wasn't just losing me. She was losing everyone. The sister she betrayed, the friends she lied to, the family she humiliated. She was spiraling, clawing for purchase, but there was nothing left to hold on to. I didn't offer her a hand. I didn't offer her a lifeline. I just stood there, calm, silent, a monument to everything she had thrown away. The fear in her eyes grew with every second I refused to argue, to plead, to fight. She was realizing, finally, that the worst thing wasn't my rage or my hatred. It was my indifference. And as she collapsed into sobs too loud and ugly to be ignored any longer, I stayed exactly where I was, unmoved, unstoppable, letting her drown in the silence she had created. The morning after the rehearsal dinner massacre, while Sarah no doubt lay curled up in a pile of her own regret and ruined plans, I was already moving. No frantic calls, no desperate texts. Just cold, methodical action. I started by locking her out of every joint financial account we shared. I had prepared the paperwork months ago when the first hairline cracks appeared, quietly moving our larger assets into an account solely under my name. Waiting until the moment she realized too late that the safety net she'd grown so comfortable dangling from was gone. I transferred the deed to my pre-marriage condo back into my private portfolio, closed the secondary credit cards she still carried in her wallet, canceled the shared car insurance, and notified the bank to freeze any pending transactions I hadn't personally authorized. Next came the legal strike, emotionless and absolute. Before noon, I filed for divorce on grounds of adultery, citing overwhelming evidence. Everything was documented: dates, times, photos, text message logs, even recordings from their little love sessions in the house I paid for. I had a copy sent directly to her work address, marked personal and confidential, because I knew she'd be there pretending to keep things normal while trying to calculate how much sympathy she could still wring from people who hadn't yet seen the photos. Step 3 was the information offensive. I didn't need to scream from the rooftops or post anything dramatic online. Instead, I composed a single, carefully crafted email address to both our families, attaching a zipped file labeled, "For your understanding." Inside were the select pieces of evidence, not all of it, just enough to make denial impossible. No commentary, no accusations, just the cold truth laid bare. I copied Jason on it too, ensuring that Claire's destruction was complete and that Sarah would have to live with the fallout from her own hands. I then moved on to practical cleanup. The house we lived in was legally mine, bought before our marriage, and kept separate thanks to a prenuptial agreement she had once laughed off as just a formality. By early afternoon, I had changed the locks and updated the security system codes. I scheduled the utilities in her name to be disconnected by the end of the week. She could have the dark, powerless skeleton of what used to be our life together if she wanted it. Step by step, piece by piece, I dismantled the illusion she had built, the one where she thought she could humiliate me, betray me, and still come back to a warm bed, a joint checking account, a husband stupid enough to forgive. I wasn't done yet. I contacted her employer, a mid-sized marketing firm where she was up for a promotion, and, without spite, simply forwarded the relevant proof of her misconduct with Claire, which included footage from their midday strategy sessions. In my living room during supposed work-from-home hours, I didn't frame it as a vendetta. I framed it as a concern for the company's reputation, and I kept my tone impeccably professional. HR departments don't like messy employees, especially not ones entangled in scandals that can bleed into the office. By the time she checked her emails, she would realize her shot at promotion had vaporized. Then, I boxed up her belongings. Everything she owned that held sentimental value, the photos, the mementos, the gifts she had once cooed over, went into neat, clearly labeled boxes stacked at the curb under a plastic tarp, scheduled for pickup. I left a single sticky note on top that simply read, "I removed what was mine. What's left is what you deserve." I didn't block her number. That would have been mercy. Instead, I silenced her and forwarded every text she sent, the apologies, the desperate justifications, the wild threats, into a folder labeled "Evidence of Harassment," ready to be used if she made the mistake of thinking she could turn her implosion into a legal battle. By evening, the chessboard had been completely cleared of her pieces. Financially, socially, legally, she still thought she had time, that she could manipulate her way back into some semblance of control, But she didn't realize she had been playing a rigged game from the moment she slipped that first lipstick stain lie under our bed. As the sun set behind the house that was once ours but now solely mine, I sat back, glass of scotch in hand, watching the security cameras from my phone as she pulled up to the driveway, her face pale and tight with false hope, only to see the locks changed. Her belongings stacked like discarded memories, and a life she no longer had access to. She banged on the door once, twice, the fury starting to crack through her polished mask, but I stayed seated, calm, detached, savoring the moment when realization truly set in. The moment she understood that everything she thought she could still salvage was already ashes at her feet. And I smiled. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but out of a pure, deep satisfaction that comes from knowing that sometimes the best revenge isn't setting a fire. It's letting them burn themselves alive with nothing but the match they struck themselves. The final blow came 2 days later, at what was supposed to be Claire's bridal shower, a grand event Sarah had spent months bragging about organizing, the kind of picture-perfect afternoon she loved posting about online to prove her life was charmed and enviable. She still thought she could muscle through the wreckage, paste on a smile, pretend none of it had stuck to her, but the damage was already baked into the walls. I showed up early, dressed sharply, looking every bit the supportive brother-in-law to be, greeting the guests warmly, shaking hands, playing my role so flawlessly that Sarah's face lit up with a flicker of hope when she saw me. The hope of a woman who believed she might still talk her way out of a noose. But that hope curdled fast. I had timed it perfectly. One by one, friends, family members, even Claire's college roommates, began receiving anonymous messages, screenshots of Sarah's conversations with Claire, private videos they had stupidly recorded of themselves in compromising embraces. Time-stamped and undeniable. Whispers began almost immediately, soft at first, but quickly growing into a thick, buzzing hum as phones vibrated in purses, as eyes widened, as glances were exchanged across the room like silent gunshots. Sarah felt it, the way an animal feels a storm before it strikes, but she tried to laugh it off, tried to keep the momentum going, raising her champagne glass higher, her voice louder, dragging Claire by the hand into posed pictures that no one else seemed eager to take anymore. Her smile grew more desperate with each minute that passed, her eyes flickering to me in silent pleading. I said nothing. I just watched her. Calm. Cold. Letting her drown under the rising tide of her own betrayal. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Claire's father, a stern, proud man who once toasted Sarah as the sister every man wishes for his daughter, stepped forward, holding his phone in one trembling hand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He simply said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Is there anything you want to confess before we continue this farce?" The room fell silent, the only sound the soft clinking of a wine glass someone had accidentally nudged. Sarah blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I don't understand, she stammered, voice too high, too sharp, already unraveling. Claire's mother, usually so quick to shield her daughters from any discomfort, turned away from Sarah in disgust, her hand gripping the back of a chair as if it was the only thing keeping her upright. Jason, the poor fool who had been about to marry Claire, walked to the center of the room, dropped a printed stack of screenshots at Claire's feet without a word, and walked out without even glancing back. Claire made a small, strangled sound, a cross between a sob and a choke, and stumbled after him, tears streaking down her perfectly made-up face. Sarah let out a strangled laugh then, a short, sharp bark of sound that sent a ripple of unease through the guests. "Come on, guys," she said, trying to recover, her voice wobbling on every syllable. "It's not what it looks like. We were just drunk, just stupid. It didn't mean anything." But no one moved. No one smiled. The room was filled with the kind of heavy, brutal silence that makes even the air taste sour. Her hands fluttered helplessly in the air, her champagne glass tilting dangerously in one hand. "You're all acting crazy," she shrieked suddenly, the last vestiges of her composure shredding. "It's not my fault." She jabbed a shaking finger toward me, desperate now, desperate to find a villain that wasn't her own reflection. He wasn't enough. He didn't love me the way she did. A few gasps broke the silence, but I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I simply stood there, hands calmly folded in front of me, watching her implode with the same detached interest a scientist might watch a failed experiment self-destruct. And she saw it. She saw that I wasn't fighting her, wasn't arguing, wasn't even trying to salvage my pride. I was simply witnessing her end. That was what broke her. Not the evidence, not the scandal, not even the loss of friends or family. It was realizing that the man she had once taken for granted, the man she thought would either rage or beg or crumble, was now a silent, immovable monument to her own failure. Her face crumpled at last, the final mask sliding off in one hideous, broken piece, and she dropped to her knees on the floor, clutching her head, sobbing uncontrollably in front of everyone she had once delighted in impressing. Nobody moved to comfort her. Nobody even spoke. The guests began to trickle out one by one, their faces tight with secondhand shame, and still I stayed, rooted to the spot, watching her rock back and forth like a child abandoned in a storm. I wanted her to remember this feeling for the rest of her life. I wanted her to know that there would never be another day where she didn't carry this weight, this moment, this collapse inside her chest. I didn't need to say a single word. My silence said everything. Sarah scrambled to her feet, her cheeks wet, her chest heaving as she stumbled toward me across the now half-empty room. And when she reached me, she didn't beg, no, she came swinging with wild, flailing words. Desperate to claw back even a scrap of the control she had burned to ash. "You think you're so perfect," she screamed, voice cracking like brittle glass, her finger jabbing the air between us. "You think you can stand there, acting like you're better than me? You didn't even notice how miserable I was. You didn't even care." Her mother gasped audibly behind her, the kind of horrified sound that seemed ripped straight from the lungs. Her father folded his arms tightly, his face a storm cloud barely held in check. Claire, mascara smudged and trembling, stood off to the side, while a few brave souls, friends, distant cousins, hovered awkwardly, phones half-raised, torn between decency and the urge to capture a meltdown that would ripple through the family group chats for years to come. Sarah shoved at my chest with both hands, weak, pathetic little pushes, like if she could just knock me off balance, she could somehow knock the truth away too. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just let her rage spill out, like a toddler throwing a tantrum after realizing the candy wasn't coming. "You were boring," she shouted louder, her voice slicing through the awkward murmurs around us. "You were routine. You were safe. I needed more. I needed passion. Claire gave me that. You never did." Gasps broke through the crowd, some people physically recoiling, others shaking their heads in disbelief. I waited until her words shriveled and died in the thick, suffocating silence before I answered, my voice low but sharp enough to cut steel. "No," I said, my tone razor clean. "You needed an audience. You needed applause. You needed to be the center of attention, even if it meant detonating everything good in your life just to feel a spark." Her mouth opened, ready to hurl another excuse, another insult, but I raised a hand, a single, simple gesture, and for once, she obeyed, falling silent, trembling. "I was your safety," I said, voice steady enough that every word seemed to hang in the air like a death sentence. "I was the one who loved you when the audience wasn't watching. I was the one who stayed when you were cruel, when you were small, when you were too selfish to see past your own reflection." I took a slow step toward her, and she actually flinched, her body betraying the terror flashing in her eyes. "You traded real love for a cheap thrill," I continued, softer now, crueler in its restraint. "You betrayed everyone here for a 5-minute fantasy. You thought you were clever. You thought you were irreplaceable. But now, I let my words drip like poison. Now you're just a cautionary tale." Her face twisted, red with fury and shame, and she shrieked, "You drove me to it. If you had been enough, if you had been a real man." But her own father cut her off, his voice booming from across the room. "Enough, Sarah." The finality of it stunned everyone. Her mother had turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth to hide her silent tears. Claire was sobbing openly now, slumped against a chair, abandoned by the very woman she had sacrificed everything to be with. Even some of Sarah's closest friends backed away, disgust etched into their faces, whispering to one another as the wreckage unfolded in real time. And still, I stood calm and composed while she unraveled before me. "You always needed someone to blame," I said, my voice barely above a whisper now, but carrying more weight than any shout. "And today, you finally get to look in the mirror and meet the only villain in your story." She tried to speak again, but her voice caught in her throat, a small, broken sound. She staggered back a step, then another, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for someone, anyone, to save her, but no one moved. Not Claire. Not Jason, who stood at the door with arms crossed, watching her fall to pieces with a grim, cold satisfaction. Not her parents, who could barely meet her eyes. I gave her one last look, not pity, not rage, just finality, and turned toward the door. The crowd parted for me like I was Moses walking through the Red Sea of human wreckage. As I walked past, I heard the soft clicks of cameras, the low murmurs of betrayal and disbelief weaving a noose tighter around her throat with every step. And I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I didn't offer her one last word, one last glance. She wasn't worth it. The world she had built on lies and betrayal had finally collapsed around her, and all that remained was the ruin of a woman who had gambled everything and lost it all in front of the very people she once lived to impress. She had wanted a stage. She had wanted an audience. Now she had them, and the only thing they would remember was how spectacularly she had fallen. Sarah's fall wasn't immediate. It was slow, humiliating, the kind of unraveling that doesn't come with explosions but with the slow, grinding realization that the life she had built on lies had no foundation at all. Within a week of the bridal shower disaster, her job let her go quietly, citing concerns about workplace reputation and professionalism issues, the kind of euphemisms that sound polite until you realize they mean you're radioactive. Her social media, once a curated shrine of faux happiness and stage perfection, turned into a graveyard overnight, post after post filled with unanswered comments, former friends quietly unfollowing, blocking, pretending they had never known her at all. Even Claire, the sister she had betrayed and clung to in her moments of false rebellion, refused to speak to her, moving away to stay with distant relatives just to avoid the stench of shared disgrace. Around town, people who once waved and smiled crossed the street when they saw Sarah coming, suddenly engrossed in their phones, pretending not to see the wreckage passing by in oversized sunglasses and a stained hoodie pulled low over her face. She moved out of the city 2 months later, slinking away in the dead of night to a dusty little town 2 hours south, working at a discount retail store where nobody asked too many questions, where anonymity was the only currency she still had. The affair partner, Claire's ex-fiancé Jason, vanished like smoke the moment her pedestal crumbled, deleting his accounts, changing his number, pretending she had never existed. She reached out to me, of course. It started with a text, a pathetic 2-line message at 2:37 a.m. one night. I still love you. I'm so sorry. I left it unread. A week later, an email, long, rambling, full of memories twisted into apologies, pleading for just one conversation, one chance to explain how lost she had been, how it wasn't really me, it was the pressure, the fear, the loneliness. I marked it as spam. Then came the phone call, the one I answered, if only so she could hear the silence between us one last time. She sobbed into the phone, her words a tangled mess of regret and desperation, painting herself as a victim of her own self-destruction. I was scared, she cried. I needed to feel something. I needed to feel alive. I was stupid. I lost everything. But I never stopped loving you. Please, please just talk to me. Please let me come home. Her voice broke on that last word, home, as if the word itself might snap a rope and pull her out of the pit she had dug with her own hands. I waited until her crying stuttered into gasping silence before I answered. Calm. Even. Without a hint of malice or pity. You are not my home, I said quietly, the words slicing cleaner than any scream ever could. You're just the reason I'd build a better one. I hung up before she could reply, before she could try to stitch together another lie, another excuse, another story to justify the ruin she had sown. I blocked her number. I blocked her email. I blocked every possible lifeline she might try to throw out, not because I hated her, but because I didn't care enough to hate her anymore. She was a chapter closed, a warning burned into my memory, a name I no longer needed to speak aloud. The last time I heard about Sarah, someone mentioned she had tried to join a dating app under a fake name, only to be recognized by a former coworker who promptly spread the word like wildfire. In a world she once ruled with fake smiles and empty charm, she had become a ghost, haunting her own mistakes. And me? I didn't look back. I rebuilt my life brick by brick, surrounded by people who knew what loyalty meant, people who didn't confuse love with convenience. In the end, Sarah wasn't a tragedy. She was a lesson, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victory isn't revenge, it's survival, thriving, becoming the person your betrayer will spend the rest of their life realizing they never deserved to know. Thank you for listening to my story. I'm curious, where are you from? And did you enjoy it? I'd love to hear your thoughts.